All right, we are on our part 8. It's getting pretty intense. They started a rock ritual for Bastion, and there was quite an argument between Bastion and Rachel. This next section is 2:01 p.m. Tommy Feathers. Class 6, 238 stayed in the circle. The room was silent. I told you it was dangerous to run a class without a teacher, Jessica said. You guys thought I was crazy, but I was right. People can get hurt. When I said that, I didn't just mean physically hurt. I meant 2 points for Jessica, Christopher mocked. Well, this is what I was talking about, she retorted. Kids aren't equipped to handle stuff like this. Look at Bastion. He had it coming, Rhonda said. Be quiet, Tim told her. Hey, everybody, take it easy, Vicky said. That's over with. Look, it's not the end of the world, Karen said. A kid in our class died and some people cried. What's so horrible about that? Today's the 6-month anniversary, Missy said in a soft voice. Tommy died on October 28th. Everybody looked at the calendar. Rachel sat up. She took a tissue and blew her nose. I always thought it was weird, Missy said. What? That we stopped talking about him, Missy said. I mean, first he was here, then he was gone, and we just... What did you expect? Tim asked. I don't know, Missy said, shrugging her big shoulders. That we'd at least mention him once in a while. Rachel wiped her eyes. She took a deep, quivery breath, and the class turned to her as if she might speak, but she did not. It's true, Vicky said. We never talk about him. Think about him a lot, Robert said. Yeah, me too, Corey said. I've had dreams about Tommy. We never wrote about him, Jasmine said. Fact, Christopher said. He nodded. Let's write, right now, Karen said. Come on, let's do it. No way, Tim said. He sat on his hand. I'm finished writing. I've got writer's cramp. Come on, Karen urged. We've got just enough time before the assembly. What I want to know is, who made you teacher? Tim demanded. You got a better idea? Karen asked him. Everybody got up and walked back to their desks. Rachel went to the stereo. She flipped through the CDs until she found what she was looking for, the 1812 Overture. The music began, lively, stirring. As much as anything, those notes brought the presence of Tommy Feathers back into class. Rachel had finally gotten her eyes dry, but now the tears started coming back, and she went to fetch the box of tissues. So here's what they're writing, starting with Missy. Yes, he was a little weird, but he was the sweetest thing. He adored Rachel. He looked at her with those big puppy dog eyes. And he was so nice to me. He was mostly nice to everyone. And he was an amazing cook. I guess it runs in the family. He used to bring lots of stuff from Feathers Bakery into class. It was not good stuff if you were trying to lose weight, but it was always delicious. My personal favorites were the lemon donuts. Just before he died, he brought in raspberry pie, pieces for everybody in the class. I guess that was his goodbye gift to us. He made a whole pie out of golden raspberries and gave it to Rachel. Golden raspberries. I mean, who ever heard of golden raspberries? Tim. He had a big head. It sounds freaky to say that about him, but that's the thing I remember most. I remember last year when he went to an assembly for bike safety. We were all trying on helmets, but for Tommy, they had to find one that was an adult size extra large. That big head made him look a little freaky. The first time my little brother met him, he stared, and I had to tell him to quit it. But it was pretty freaky seeing a kid with a head that big. Jasmine. Last fall, Mr. Fobbs said, not all stories have happy endings. Boy, that's for sure. I'll never forget seeing him at Feathers Bakery. His parents really loved him. You could just tell. They didn't care that he was a little slow, and they didn't treat him as any different than anyone else. He waited on customers, boxed donuts, poured coffee, counted out change. They got up at 5 a.m. on weekend mornings to make donuts, and Tommy got up with them. Mom said they were trying to make him independent so he could run the bakery himself someday. Just before Christmas, I went into Feathers Bakery to get some jelly rolls. Mr. and Mrs. Feathers looked so sad. They didn't smile. They hardly said a thing. It was the saddest thing. Their only son, dead. I haven't been able to go back there ever since. Christopher. Fact. Tommy Feathers died on October 28th. Fact. My father has had at least a dozen patients die in the operating room during heart surgery. Fact. Everybody dies. It's sad, but it happens. Opinion. As soon as Tommy Feathers died, people stopped telling the truth about him. Fact. He was a pretty good cook, but his hands were never that clean. Fact. I've seen Tommy Feathers push down younger kids and make them cry. Fact. I've heard them tell dirty jokes. Nasty jokes. Opinion. Tommy Feathers was not the nicest person in the world. I'm not saying he was evil. I'm just saying he had plenty of faults like everyone else. Why should we turn him into some kind of saint just because he died? Rachel. Dear Bastian, I'm sorry about what happened today. It's true I was mad at you because you teased Tommy. I wish I could pretend that you were the only one who did that, but you weren't. You're right. Lots of kids teased him, in little ways or big. I was mean to him too. I guess getting mad at you was easier than facing up to what I did. He used to send me little valentines during class. I'd roll my eyes or make a face at Missy. That would make Tommy so sad. I wonder if I'll ever forgive myself for that. You weren't always mean to him. I remember the time Tommy hit a home run in kickball. You and Tim picked him up and carried him around on the field on your shoulders. You couldn't see his face because you were carrying him, but he was just beaming. You made him a hero that day. I'll never forget that. Sorry you got upset. I'd hate this to be the last thing you remember about this school. Sincerely, Rachel. The door opened. Bastian and John walked into the room. Some of the kids turned to look at Bastian. What are you staring at? John demanded. Without looking at anybody, Bastian walked over to his desk, took out a piece of paper, and started to write. Rachel brought her paper to Bastian and laid it on his desk. When Bastian ignored her and continued writing, she turned and went back to her seat. May I have your attention? Mr. Peacock said over the loudspeaker. All 6th grade classes should proceed immediately to the auditorium for the assembly. Okay, we better line up, Jasmine said, taking a deep breath. Assembly, Tim muttered. Who are we going to see? Some kind of storyteller, Karen said. His name is Cloth Slot. I think he's Hungarian. What kind of twisted name is that? Christopher asked. He went over to Robert and made his eyes squinty. Hi, my name is Cloth Slot. How do you do? This is it, guys, Karen said. Once we get into the auditorium, we're home free. Let's keep those lines straight. But not too straight, Jasmine put in. Come on, John said to Bastian. Go on ahead, Bastian said, writing furiously. I'll catch up. Are you okay? Missy whispered to Rachel. Rachel nodded. As she left the classroom, Sean came up to her. I was wondering, he said, can I walk you home today? Rachel raised her eyes to smile at him. She had not said a word, but the smile was as good as a word because it clearly said yes. 2:25 p.m. School auditorium. Bastian ran out of the classroom and sprinted down the hallway until he caught up with the rest of the class. From the back of the line, he watched the other kids walking ahead of him. The girls walked first, Karen and Jasmine with Jessica half step behind. Rhonda came next, followed by Vicky, Missy, and Rachel. Sean walked behind Rachel. After a short gap, Christopher came ambling along, followed by Corey and Robert, then Sky, Jordan, Tim, and John. Here, Bastian said to John. He handed him a slip of paper. Can you give this to Mr. Fabiano on Monday? Piece of cake, John said, nodding. Piece of crumb cake. I mean it, Bastian said. It's important. Don't forget. Hey, don't worry, John said. I won't. Last day of school. There was one last thing Bastian had to do before the day was over. Wait here, he told John. Bastian picked up his pace until he was walking beside Sean O'Day. Hi, Bastian said. Sean looked over, surprised. They hardly ever spoke to each other. I need someone to take care of my puppy, Bastian said. I'm not bringing him to Hawaii. Why not? Sean asked. It's a long story. You want him? What? Sean wasn't sure he had heard right. I ask if you'll want my dog, Bastian said. You're giving me your puppy? Yeah, Bastian said. You said you've been wanting to get a dog, right? Well, you want him or not? Well, yeah, Sean said. He still couldn't believe what he was hearing. Okay, he's yours, Bastian said, but if I ever hear you're not taking care of him, I'll come back here and rip both of your arms off, okay? Sean nodded seriously. I mean that, Bastian said. His eyes had teared up again. You don't have to worry, Sean told him. You need to come over to my house after school. Rachel walked down a hallway that was long and smooth as an airport runway. She thought of Amelia Earhart, tired and hungry, near the end of her first solo trip across the Atlantic, trying to find a place to land her plane. It's not about breaking any record, Rachel thought. It's about finding a place to land, a way to land, so nobody gets hurt. Class 6, 238 was jumpy with adrenaline. It made them walk faster than usual, so fast that then when they got to the auditorium, they almost ran smack into the back of Mrs. Kiefer's class ahead of them. Rachel walked into the auditorium. The enormous room seemed teemed with talking kids. She experienced the sound as an ocean, rolling, shifting, sighing. As Class 6, 238 took their seats, a little ripple of excitement flickered through one side of the auditorium. Other sixth graders looked over, winking, giving them the thumbs up sign, clapping softly. We're famous, Rhonda whispered as she took her seat next to Rachel. Act normal, Karen reminded everyone. Down by the stage, Mr. Peacock was talking to a tall, strange man. Rachel guessed that was Cloth Slop, the storyteller. Next to him, there was a woman with a fancy camera around her neck. She must be from the newspaper, Missy whispered to Rachel. Everyone, please take your seats, Mr. Peacock said. He stood at the microphone, waiting until all the talking had stopped. This is a very special day, Mr. Peacock said to the hushed crowd. We are all in for a real treat this afternoon. We have a wonderful storyteller with us, a man who comes all the way from Hungary in Eastern Europe. I know you will give our guest your complete attention. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Cloth Slop. Applause. Rachel studied the man as he moved to the microphone. He had a beard and long ponytail. More than anything, he reminded her of Paul Bunyan. I've got a story to tell you, he began in a voice so amazingly low it was practically gravel. He paused and looked around fiercely, as if daring anyone to disagree. But I'm going to need some help for this one. I'll need 4 teachers. At this, Mr. Peacock sprang to the microphone. Why don't we have the 6th grade teachers come up here? He suggested. There was more applause as Mrs. Riley, Mrs. Friedman, and Mrs. Kiefer made their way to the front of the auditorium. They stood smiling nervously in front of the storyteller. Oh no, whispered Missy. Rachel squeezed her armrest hard. Mr. Fabiano isn't here. Mr. Peacock said, searching the crowd, his eyes fixed on Karen Ballard. Karen, who is your substitute? Karen stood. 611 kids, 31 teachers, one storyteller, one newspaper photographer, and one principal stared at her. Rachel could see that Karen's hands were shaking. If anybody can handle a moment like this, she thought, it's Karen Ballard. Karen hesitated, biting her lip. Who is your substitute? Mr. Peacock asked again. Karen hesitated a second, then threw up her arms. It was the only time Rachel had seen Karen make such a gesture, and it was so helpless, so completely out of her character. Rachel almost burst out laughing. Well? Mr. Peacock demanded. He leaned forward to listen. Well, see, Karen stammered. See, we didn't have a sub today. We didn't have anybody. At that moment, the photographer swiveled around. Her flash went off, and all craziness broke loose. Part 8. Next week, you will hear how Flying Solo concludes.